And it did. It took a crisis to get me to where I am today. And I think the crisis is probably not the same exact thing, but it's that crisis that got anyone probably listening to this podcast or who's joined our community and or any other community, right? That got them to the point that they are today, or to where they're going in the future. It's that crisis. So, yeah.
Welcome to the Masterful Man podcast. I'm your host, Sven Masterson, coach, mentor, author, and fellow traveler on the path to mastery. Every man reaches the point where he knows he can't keep living the way he has been. The question is, what comes next? Here, you'll hear from men who've made the shift, men who've gone from stuck to unstuck, unshakable, and unstoppable. If you're ready to start moving forward, you're in the right place. In today's episode, I'm talking with Jeff, a father and software consultant who just a few years ago was quietly unraveling inside a life that looked perfectly successful from the outside. His marriage was falling apart, his sense of self was tied to performance and perfectionism, and his emotional world had been on mute for decades. But then something shifted. A rejection on the couch sparked a crisis, and that crisis became the doorway to his transformation. Jeff's story is one of awakening, grief, rebuilding, and deep self-discovery. If you've ever felt like the life you're living looks good on paper but leaves you feeling numb, unseen, or stuck, this episode will feel like coming home. Let's get into it. Hey, welcome, Jeff. Nice to have you on the Masterful Man podcast today. Thank you for your willingness to be here. I kind of was laughing at how many people we have with the same names. So in our brief podcast career, I think this is going to be like episode 14 or so. We've had two Jeffs. We've had duplicate names, I think, in some other ways, or we will. So you're going to be the other Jeff.
The other Jeff.
So,
all right.
And if we have another Jeff, we'll have the other Jeff. So before we jump into just hearing your story, I wonder if you could share some orientation kind of information with the listener. I like to have men say their approximate age, their marital status, their parenting status, approximately what they do for a living, general area they live in, this kind of thing.
Okay. Yeah. So I'll give a precise age, right? I'm 48. I'm going to turn 49 in July, so right around the corner. I live in New England. Okay. I was born and raised in central New York. But I've been in the New England area for, I guess it's over half of my life now. Kind of interesting to think of that, right? Being 48 years old, and time flies. I have two children, a 15-year-old and a 12-year-old, and I am no longer married. So about 5 years ago, that would make it 2020, is when my divorce finalized. So since then, I've been obviously not married. I haven't been remarried, and I've dated. I've been in a long-term relationship, and so that's kind of my and for what I do for work, I'm a consultant. I work in software implementations. It's a pretty challenging job, but I really enjoy it. And yeah, so that's kind of, I guess, me in a nutshell.
Okay. Well, as I told you before we got started, I'm excited to have you and to have you tell your story for a number of reasons. One of them is we've known each other a pretty long time now. I think something like 6 or 7 years. We met each other in an environment where I wasn't coaching. And so our stories have in some ways been parallel, I think, as far as, we kind of entered this kind of stuff around the same time, a little bit different circumstances. I think even when we met, you were in maybe I would say the pre-divorce, if that's fair. So, but also because I think you just give a great story of the meandering that some of us take through this kind of self-discovery, figuring out what what's going on in marriage. And as you know, I really like our podcast to demonstrate all kinds of outcomes in a relationship, because I think sometimes people get this idea that really staying married is like the ultimate goal. I haven't found that to be true, despite my story having turned out that way so far. And so what I really love is when men come on the podcast and tell their story who didn't stay married, but are what I would call victors. And because I think a lot of men out there will hear this and their story's not going to go that way. They're not going to reconcile with their partner. They're going to choose a different path. And I want them to know that they can turn out like you, to be blunt. And I think that's a great thing to demonstrate. I want you to be yourself, tell your story unashamedly. I know you will anyway. And let's jump into it. Anything you want to say before that?
No, well, yes, I guess.
Okay.
I appreciate all of that. And I do think that it's important that I think the way that I look at what we've all gone through, right, collectively, is so many of the details are always different, but the story is so similar, right? So, and remarkable, I think, at the same time. It's just for me. So, and it took a crisis to get me to where I am today. And I think it's the crisis is probably not the same exact thing, but it's that crisis that got anyone probably listening to this podcast or who's joined our community and or any other community, right? That got them to the point that they are today, or to where they're going in the future. It's that crisis. So
yeah, that's it. And I have a lot of goals for this podcast, but one of them is that a man in a crisis can connect with an idea that a crisis can be one of the most profoundly beneficial things that happens to you in your life. And I think we do a good job showing that in these podcasts, because when you're in it, as you know, and we'll get started with that in a minute, it's not how you see the world. You're looking at your crisis as though it is your undoing. And you can't see from that vantage point the advantage that your crisis is. And I love our stories because they highlight the power of a crisis to bring about transformation. So setting the stage, if we had met you, let's say you said, I think we met in 2018 or 2019.
Yep.
I think it was actually 2018. Yeah, because we went to Mexico. I think we met in Puerto Vallarta baggage claim.
Yes.
Being like these guys that were going to go on a retreat together for a week.
Oh, I'm remembering the baggage claim now. I'm remembering the setting. Yeah. Okay.
How would you have described yourself if somebody asked you about yourself? Like, how'd you see yourself as a man, husband, father, this kind of thing?
Yeah. So I think one thing I'll put out there is like, one thing clearly I'm pretty nervous. I'm going to be fine. I think maybe I'll come across as nervous or not. I'm not sure.
You don't seem it.
Maybe. Yeah. Like to go a little into my background, and I've always received compliments from people that I seem so calm and measured and approachable and whatever else. But I've definitely and still am, struggle with a lot of anxiety. So I think I'm able to manage it internally pretty well and keep an outward presentation that fixed with that. But I just put out there that's, something, and I struggle with it. I have periods of time, even now today, right? So it's a pattern in my life where it comes and I deal with it. So just thinking about a few years before we met in Mexico or a year going back, that gets to about the time of, I'll call it my crisis, when I first realized that there was really something wrong with my marriage. And another interesting thing is I feel like this is quite a distance of time for me now. So I have some specific memories and I do remember the themes and how things flowed, but as they say, in a way, time has a tendency to heal wounds, right? So time also has a tendency maybe to reformat or just kind of hide some of those details. So my goal is to be super honest here, but also too, I think there may be some things that I recall differently than they maybe happened or whatever else.
Can I comment on that real quick? One thing about memory I would suggest is all memory is creative. When you remember 7 years ago, you're remembering it from who you are today. And who you are today isn't who you were 7 years ago. So this is kind of the beautiful thing about our memory is we think we're recalling things exactly as they were, but we're actually recalling them as we are now. And that's kind of neat in a story like this, because it could be very different than you experienced at those days. You're going to have a different perspective, and that's okay. That's the point, is sharing how you can recall what intellectually was one of the most painful times of your life. But now, 7 years later, you'll have a different perspective.
Yes.
So totally legit. And I see you in your anxiety and whatnot. And just, I also know from a lot of experience with you that you'll be yourself, and that's the gift that you have to share here. So keep going.
Like a few years before, I guess the 2x4 to the face or whatever, so the phrase that I'll pull up from some of my other experiences was just, I was on the couch one day and I was watching TV. My wife was on the other side of the couch and invited her to sit next to me. For whatever reason, she was sitting further down, and she did not want to sit next to me. So I got, kind of a pretty terse response, and it was a pretty strong rejection. And then from there, there had been some other moments or times like that in the past where I just kind of ignored it and just moved on. But that time I started to ask some questions, and that's when I think she first started opening up to me about how she felt about things and where she was at. And that, I think, caused me to sort of start reflecting on who I had been for a period of time and what I was doing. So, in a lot of ways, I was a pretty avoidant person. So when there was conflict in the house, I did some of the classic things. It was, all right, well, I'm just going to go and take care of the yard a little bit more. And I'm going to see about making sure that I'm getting a little more work done. Maybe I'll spend a little less time with the guys after work. So one of the things that I had with work was we very frequently at the end of the day, there were a couple bars nearby, and we would go at the end of the day and we would hang out. And invariably, like when we went, I would always check in first, but it seemed like whenever I went, there was no way that I would arrive home and things would be like it would have been an okay thing for me to have done. And one thing I want to put out there is I do think that this is my recollection of the friction that I wasn't really seeing or understanding at the time. And so that's kind of how things were going. And finally, that conversation on the couch, I think, is when I really started to realize that this is something that I can't fix with the same pattern of behavior that I had. And that's when I started to do late night Googling and whatever else. And one thing I meant to ask before we started, we're okay with getting specific about like other groups and the types of things that we found? Okay. So totally I found an article that Steve Horsman wrote. Okay. And it was to like a divorced moms group or some divorced moms website. I actually searched for it a few months ago and I can't find it anymore. I think it's gone. And I'm a little sad about that, because I read that article and it was a like exact description of everything that had happened. And I think it was that connected with the realization of that I was not able to fix where I was at, the issue with my marriage on my own, right? So finding that kind of got me into this whole space. So I started watching all of Steve's YouTubes. Probably a lot of the guys on this listening to this podcast may have done the same thing. And from there, what I did is I reached out and had a conversation with Steve, and he told me about one of his retreats. And so this gets kind of segues back into the baggage claim conversation, but I made it a decision that I was going to go. And then at the end of the call, I was like, Steve, you got to give me some stuff to do. Like, what can I do? Because the retreat's not for 2 months. And what am I going to do for this whole time? And he just kind of told me that I had to chill. And I just almost couldn't accept it. I said, well, how about this? I'm just going to watch all your stuff. And he's like, yeah, that's fine. It's like, we'll see you in 2 months, but there's no real homework, right? He didn't even give me any books to read, I think, at the time. It was interesting. I mean, a lot of the other people I've talked to who started things up with him, same pattern, right? I need something to do, right? What can I do to get a leg up on all of this? And so 2 months later, I ended up hopping on the plane and I arrived in Colorado and got into a van with, I think it was 3 or 4 other guys who were going to the same retreat. And we just all started opening up. And it was just the same kind of thing in the baggage claim where it was like every guy here was so hungry for this and so ready to kind of just lay it all out. And we had people, all walks of life. It was an artist, a street artist from Florida. There was a, garage door salesman, or a guy who was running a garage door salesman business, and me, a consultant, and a police officer. Like so many different walks of life, but we were all in the same space, having the same experiences and just having these conversations. So that was my first experience, but that's almost the same thing that we had. So for you in Mexico, I had done that before before that. So
I knew that. And maybe for the person listening, since Steve comes up a lot in our conversations, I've never really kind of added context to that. But for people listening, we're talking about Steve Horseman from Good Guys to Great Men. And Steve has a real gift, especially for helping men who were just told by their partner that she wants a divorce, or that she loves you, but she's not in love with you, or that she needs space. And so I got to know Steve also, but I was kind of an exception for Steve's typical person reaching out, because I was the guy that his marriage wasn't going well, and I was the one that was thinking about moving away. So for men listening, there's oftentimes people are looking at maybe getting a divorce, and Steve helps all kinds of people too, don't get me wrong. I tend to help guys the most who are either in sexless marriages or who are really irritated and angry and frustrated or disappointed or melancholy, but men who are unhappy in their marriage and it's high on their minds. Sometimes it's their partners that are instigating, but 9 out of 10 men I help are generally the flip of Steve's scenario, right? But yes, so I remember that you had gone to this ranch retreat of his, and you had met some people. Before you had that couch moment, Jeff, what would you say your kind of typical life and pursuit was about? Like, what were you pursuing? How did you think life was going? Did you like who you were and how you lived as a man, this kind of thing?
That's a really good question. I think for me, I was unhappy for sure, all around, right? But everywhere I looked, at every aspect of my life, right, I was doing better than most, right? So you could measure, I had a good job, I had a good wife, right? I had great family, everything. I was swimming at the time. I was a competitive swimmer. I still sort of am. I've transitioned to running or whatever, but I was relatively fit, and I had a good everywhere I looked, right? I was getting validation from the outside, and when I compared myself to other people, but I was definitely in a lot of, I was just unhappy. I was never like a happy person. I didn't know what it meant. And what's interesting is maybe I kind of looked at and compared it to what I thought my parents, like where they were at. And I just had this feeling that life probably is about just being unhappy, but just kind of persevering through that. And you keep going, right?
Sort of low-key resignation. You think that's a fair way to say it? Like, hey, this is as good as it gets. You finish work, you go to a nearby bar, hang out with your mates, go home to a wife who's not really ever happy with you. And then you get up and do it again tomorrow.
Yeah, until you retire. So what's interesting is in my head, right? That was sort of the thing. I was like, all right, well, we've got these 2 kids. We're raising these kids. I have a career. We've got a house. These are all the things. I'm checking off all of the daily boxes, right? Things are in pretty good shape. But I guess, yeah, it was interesting though, because I started to shift my focus to retirement thinking. And this never really came to a head directly with my ex-wife, but I just remember having conversations with her about that. It was like I was thinking about it. Well, what do we want to do when we retire? Like, how do we want life to be? And um, I just remember I was thinking of ideas, what I might like, but I never really got very specific with it. So I started to ask her what she wanted, because I wanted to make sure that I was going to bring, or whatever I was doing, I was making sure for the both of us that we would have what we wanted in retirement. So it's a very
Yeah.
interesting thing, like that fixation. And I just remember what I would hear from her was a lot of, I don't know, I just don't want to have to eat cat food and that kind of thing. And it was just interesting because I couldn't figure it out. I was like, why can't I get any specific answers? And why won't anyone tell me what they want? And I never really took it much further than that, but I just thought, well, all right, I'll just keep on keeping on. But, reflecting back on that after having gone through a fair amount of the process, what I thought was interesting is that what I didn't realize is I was not living in the present, right? So, and I'd gone almost as far as you can go, right? I was wanting to live my retirement. And also too, the people that I was asking for input and what that should look like, I don't think they could stand to be in the present with me either. So it's kind of interesting to be saying like, hey, tell me what you want things to be like 30 years from now. When right now it's like, holy smokes, like this is really just a tough situation. No one's happy, right?
Yeah. So based on the age you shared are now, I mean, you're barely 40 years old having this conversation, which that is something a lot of men mention in conversations, both in our community and on calls like this, on mentoring calls. And we all kind of think this is normal, this whole idea of living for the future. I think in our culture, my observation is we've been conditioned to this idea that life is up ahead and you're supposed to check all these boxes as fast as you can. And then you sort of white knuckle / park yourself in resignation until some magical point in the future where life is delivered to you on some sort of platter. And so you end up chasing this like a carrot, and it's insidious because it shows up in your romantic relationship with your kids. For me, I felt like I was having a perpetual conversation that people felt like they were interrupting me sometimes talking to me. And it was that ruminating on the future. How can I get a better future? How can I make sure this happens and that happens? I had no idea that I was suffering from, I would say anxiety actually, but also just that I wasn't present. So I don't remember a lot of those years for that reason, because I spent those years thinking about these years.
That's really interesting that you say that, right? Because I mean, over time, right, memory is what it is. But I wonder, like, just thinking about my 20s and 30s, I don't have a lot of, now that I'm thinking about it, but maybe in the moment, and this is whatever, some kind of a confirmation bias maybe, but there's not a lot of memory of my 20s.
It's really common that people say this,
right? So
yeah. I'm no expert in this, of course, but I believe it's a fair statement that the things that are the most memorable to us are things that were multi-dimensional, multi-sensory experiences, and specifically experiences that had an emotional signature. And most men I meet, myself included, and I'm curious about you here, you're taught to suppress your emotional life and to check these boxes. And the script we're given is to think about, your retirement, constantly think about the future. So it puts you in a state where most people, they're not having a lot of emotionally gratifying experiences. They're numbing out maybe in some sort of ways. So it makes sense to me that I don't have a lot of memories from my 20s, my 30s, even my early 40s, because I was emotionally numb. And I don't think I was living in a way where I was even noticing the stuff going on in my life.
Yeah.
So even when I look at pictures, it's weird because I'm looking at pictures. It doesn't look like me. I look entirely different. I don't remember it. And I don't feel like I was there. And I would say I wasn't. because I was living in the future
I
or
avoided
in a
pictures.
fantasy. You do now?
I avoided pictures being in
Yeah,
them.
yeah, me too. Me
It was
too.
maybe a self-loathing kind of thing, but
Hmm.
it's almost like I don't want to remember this in a way, right? Which is kind of sad. Well, definitely sad. That's interesting.
Yeah. No, it's very, very relatable. I know for me, it was definitely a self-loathing element for sure. And in some ways, not feeling worthy to be there on a number
Mm.
of levels. And I think that is one of the things that kind of compels men to be so future focused is our insecurity and our low sense of self-worth kind of creates this feeling like I have to get to the future where I'm worthy.
Yeah.
And because we believe I don't feel the things I want to feel right now because I'm not worthy to feel them in some way. And so we have all these aspirational goals. When I make this much money, when I have this kind of 401k, when I have this kind of validation, when I'm this level of fitness. So then you give all your days to chasing all these things that you believe are going to give you value and worth and significance because you don't believe that you're those things today. That's a story I lived in, and a lot of men I meet lived in. Sounds like you may have lived in something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And what's
Like
funny too,
something about retirement seemed like it would be a
well,
Xanadu kind of moment.
yeah, I mean it's maybe baked into the whole concept of, well, once we hit retirement, I'm done having to provide, right? Because supposedly everything is done. We can go on autopilot. I can continue to do that, but it's sort of like my homework's done in a way, right? Because that's in my mind, that was what I was on this planet to a certain extent to deliver, right? More than that, but really, it was always a financial thing for me.
Yeah.
Was
Yeah.
the money. And one other point that I think's kind of interesting that you triggered is just going back to 2018, 2017, when I'm starting to do all of this work, and I had to Google what emotions there are. I didn't know what any of them were. It was I just remember in the Colorado, that retreat in Colorado, there was definitely some pretty deep conversations that were happening, and some guys were talking about the emotion difference between like emotions and feelings and all that stuff. And I was like, holy crap, I have so much to learn. But I remember I really had to Google that and look it up and learn what the different emotions even were. I didn't know,
Why do you think
which is
that
kind of
is?
interesting.
Like, I mean, by your own understanding of your story,
Yeah.
what do you think happened or didn't happen that set you up to be a man who in his, low 40s has to Google what emotions are?
Mm.
Because this is not uncommon, just to be
Oh
really,
yeah.
yeah.
I mean, okay, so I think this goes back to probably childhood and just the way that I was brought up. And this is not coming from a place of like upset or whatever else. I think it's more just my thinking of the reality of how things went. As a kid, I've always been above average, right? Not a lot, but I had a great, I would say there was nothing missing. There were things that were missing, but grew up next to the elementary school and the high school. I could walk to school. My parents showed up to all my games. We never really, I wouldn't say that we were super well off, but all of us kids, well, I had three siblings, so two of us had to share a room. But we had a 4-bedroom house with a yard. And when it was time to drive, I had a car, so I could go to the high school and get myself around or whatever. So all the things, right, that we needed. But what I think was interesting is that I never really wanted to be like an A student. In my head, I knew that I just didn't want to, like, I wanted to learn. I liked going to school, but it just was not me to be like the straight A student. And the problem was that's what my parents wanted. And so I would work harder, but I would also screw up and miss homework assignments or whatever else. And so there were always consequences. And it was a very transactional thing. I'm kind of going stream of consciousness here, but I remember as a little child when we would go to church and I was a kid, we had a schedule of things. So certain behaviors in church would get you certain consequences. And I remember it was things like silly things like this. Like if you talked too much, then you'd have to sit in the chair for 5 minutes when you got home. If you wanted to sit in mom's lap at church, you could do that. But if you did that, you would have to sit in the chair for 15 minutes when you came home. So as the chair was just, in the dining room, and it was just, being grounded for a couple minutes or whatever. But it was interesting because I remember in my head, I was doing the calculus like, all right, yeah, okay, I'll sit in that chair for 15 minutes so I can hang out on my mom's lap. So there was that, like, kind of this weird sort of transactional nature. But the other thing that I think really affected me that I didn't realize is so even when I did get the A, there would be a pat on the back, but that would be immediately followed with okay, so what are you doing to get ahead of the next thing? Why aren't you could be doing more. You could be working harder. And I think that really got baked into me. And the reality was I wasn't able to just decide who I wanted to be and just be happy with that, right? Because no matter what, when I was, and eventually I did live that, it's just like, it's high B's, low A's, loved swimming and great friends and all that stuff. But all the while, I was not good enough, right? Like I could have been working harder. And that was a tough one. Like when, I was a senior in high school, and I remember I was swimming like my last race, and it was interesting. I didn't go all out on it because I kind of realized that there were like 4 guys who were seriously fast, like way faster than me in my race. And I just knew I wasn't going to be able to beat any of them, but I knew that the 6th place person, the person behind me, had no chance of beating me. So I was just kind of in this, like in the center of all that. And I knew if I just, swim my race, I'm going to be fine. And I remember telling my dad that. I was like, well, there was almost no choice. Like I was watching the other guys in the finals, but I knew, so if one of them blew up, I might be able to make a move. But I just knew that I wouldn't. And I remember he just couldn't understand. He's like, but why didn't you go out and swim a best time anyways? And I was just like, I don't know. I just kind of, this is the end, and where do I go with this? Like, I'm not swimming in college. I'm going to do something different in college. So I was just, in a way, I was just like, hey, this is what I did. I placed 5th, and, I'm pretty happy with that. All along the way, internally, that's what I wanted to be. But anytime I talk to anyone else to try to get an external validation, I guess now I know, like, that's what I was trying to do. They all gave feedback that, like, well, you could have put a little bit more in, so you weren't enough. So anyways, that's my long kind of,
yeah, no, this is really important. This is the foundation of things like our sense of self-worth. Yeah. I thought about this a lot. It's my general view that most parents are not horrible people that are making deliberate decisions to teach us conditional love. I think most of our parents in our community, and I'm just kind of speaking with a broad brush, they probably just wanted the best for their kids, wanted to have the best opportunity, wanted them to have a good work ethic. And the way they thought to do that was have these kind of parental perspectives. And they didn't account for or maybe understand that the way human psychology is a young person whose identity is forming they're not able to see that. They don't have the wisdom to know, oh, my parents are doing this because they want the best for me. You're taking all these things very personally. They're intersecting with your sense of, a low sense of self-worth. And you start building this conditional self-acceptance. And it's unintentional, I think, most of the time, but it doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, you end up believing that I'm only valuable and worthy when I perform and I achieve, right? Versus, oh no, you're valuable and worthy regardless. This just might determine if you get a scholarship or not, or something like that, right? We lack the wisdom to understand the context for the things our parents oftentimes were trying to show us. And so we made them about a different context, specifically about our personhood. And then you feel kind of horrible. And you don't really do anything about that. You just go to college, maybe get a job, get married, and you still think this way.
Yeah. And then you get into the numbing behaviors, right? So
some people, yeah. Well, you're going to numb or you can explode, one of the two.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I never had a drinking problem, right? Or anything like that. I can't, but for sure, I did did a fair amount, and I did it with my friends. I never, like, not on my own, but absolutely, that has been something in my life that I feel like I did use to kind of numb myself out from the realities. Because, the same things that happened in high school happened in college as well. And I knew the stakes were a little bit higher. A lot of feedback from my parents about you should do better and whatever else. And, I was at a pretty high level university, right? And I was able to contribute to a Division I water polo team. Like, I was able to, for a few years, I played on that team. It was, they removed it my sophomore year. They ended the team. But, it's like all these things, which are pretty amazing achievements, I would think, right? And all along the whole time I was thinking, yeah, but that's just, it's not quite good enough. I could be doing so much more. So yeah, in those years, I was definitely drinking. And what's good is the university I went to, there wasn't a lot of like access to the drugs and things like that. So I knew some of the other places where my friends were or whatever else, like they had more access to that. I'm thankful that kind of thing. I just didn't run into it. Maybe I picked good friends when I was there, but mostly it was just like alcohol during that time. And yeah, I think it just all, it just continues to kind of tamp it down, the emotional components of my experience, right? I had squished. I didn't know them. I couldn't even define them. I couldn't even tell you what I was feeling. I knew I was uncomfortable. So maybe that's what my emotions were like uncomfortable. That was the emotion that I felt in a way.
I think a lot of us learn in that kind of context you just described that our emotions are a liability. Because you're describing a system of achievement-based self-worth where you have to perform and you have to hit goals, you have to check boxes, and there really isn't a place for emotions in that, because everything's about utility and about what gets the job done. How do I be a good provider? How do I be a good protector? You're not waking up asking, how do I be a really great human being and what would make my life really epic? Because we're following the script given to us by culture, parents, or maybe church in your case. And you don't know what you don't know. You just know, like, yeah, it doesn't feel so great. So I'm going to go out and work really hard. And when it's quiet and I don't know what to do with myself, instead of feeling, I'm just going to go to the bar, have a couple beers, whatever, do something fun. And it's not that there's anything terrible necessarily about all these things, but it doesn't sound like a vigorous life. It doesn't sound like vitality.
It was a life of blind spots in my mind. I didn't know what I was missing, right? So yeah, like that I could go after and take risks and do the things that I wanted to do. For whatever reason, I just wasn't aware that was an option. It was play it safe and just work harder at the things that you know how to do and stay in your lane, I think is the wrong phrase, but it's that kind of thing. It's like, know what you're good at and just work on that.
Hey brother, quick pause. If you're resonating with this conversation and you know there's more for you, more clarity, more confidence, more connection, come check out the Masterful Man community. It's a place where men stop white-knuckling life alone and start growing alongside other men who get it. We don't do hype, shame, or surface-level advice. Just real transformation, real brotherhood, and the kind of support most men have never experienced before. You can start with a 7-day free trial and see for yourself what it's like to be surrounded by men who are unstuck, unshakable, and unstoppable. Just head to masterful.men to join us. All right, back to the episode.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this up because I believe you're perhaps inadvertently laying the context about why crisis is needed. Because we would be asleep like this otherwise indefinitely. I love the movie, the first version, the first Matrix, for this reason, because you're describing to me kind of like the Matrix, where Neo and everybody else are essentially batteries who are just having the life sucked out of them, but they're given this dream world to pursue and to occupy them. And I think that movie is a great commentary on this exact thing, that this is what we're told is life. And then there's some sort of crisis moment, which I want to get to in a minute. So you had this moment on the couch. Were there any other emotional, relational patterns kind of leading up to this that maybe started to, in hindsight, were revealing that some stuff was starting to crack?
In terms of, I mean, there were a lot of contentious, all the interactions within my house, right, were emotionally charged. And I thought it was because I was doing things wrong, right? Or never getting anything right. So in a way, I was taking all of it personally. So anything negative that happened around me, I internalized, and I, in a way, tried to take responsibility for it, but I just couldn't figure out what to do, right? So it gets back to that whole thing. It's like, I'll go out and I'll mow the lawn a little bit harder this time. I'll, just do an extra load of laundry or whatever else. So
do you see how that sort of makes sense, though, if that's based on how you were conditioned to show up, that if, even the 15 minutes on mom's lap is like, well, okay, if you do that, you got to pay for it here. Mm-hmm. And this idea of, well, you could try harder, you could have gotten a better, time in your swim meet, this kind of thing. So it's like, okay, just tell me the levers to pull and the dials to turn when there's some sort of problem in my marriage. I mean, that's what you were doing in all of life.
Yeah. Well, I had like 7 levers or whatever it was, right? So there were 7 things I knew how to do, and I just thought, well, maybe I could pull on those a little bit better, right? And that's and not realizing that maybe I could have, looked behind those levers to figure out what else, what other things were there. That's what it was. It was a blind spot and a lot of blind spots. So I was blind to it. I just didn't know.
And I wouldn't say that that's not a character defect, just to qualify that for the listener. Mm-hmm. We say a lot in our community and in this kind of work, we don't know what we don't know.
Yes.
Yeah. You're just living out your programming at that point. So, and this can be challenging sometimes because our partners believe we should know, right? The should word, or that we're misbehaving, not really understanding that when a man is doing this and a woman, let's just say your ex or really any woman, is really frustrated in the relationship because maybe she wants more, wants differently. Most women, I don't think, realize that this is how men have been raised. So they reach for the tools they know. They reach for the levers and dials that our experience of society told us is what you use. And they don't work really well. But some women then take this very personally in a relationship with us and say, well, you're not doing the things that would make it better. But most men have no idea what that would be.
Yeah.
So this is maybe a segue to ask you about your relationship with other men during this time. You mentioned going to the bar with some buddies and whatnot after work. From today's perspective, how would you describe your relationship with other men back in those days?
Well, it was a lot of, it was escaping the situations we were in. So I had a fair amount. So growing up in high school or whatever, and it was, and I'm still friends with a lot of the guys I went to high school with. So I go back and visit them. It was not a whole lot of like deep conversations there. It was hanging out, having a good time, goofing around, and it was great, right? They're all great guys, great people, but there wasn't a lot of deep conversations, not a lot of people, any one of us really bringing to the table challenges that we're having in our personal lives or whatever else, right? As far as back as I can remember. I mean, mostly it would have just been that, so-and-so's in a whole lot of trouble because of something that we did together, right? What are we going to do there? And then the other group of friends that I had in 20s, 30s, those would be, coworkers. So there were a group of guys, and I've basically been working with the same company for over 20 years now. Things have changed like dynamically, but I was acquired, or my group was acquired 3 times along the way. So that's the interesting thing, and that's kept me interested in continuing to work there, because things have changed quite a bit between then and now. But I had developed some pretty close friendships with a lot of the fellas that I worked with there, and I think the relationship again there was a lot of not very deep conversations about like life's problems or whatever else. It's actually interesting. I'm trying to remember what we would really talk about. I think we talk more about work, probably complain about the challenges and the issues that we're having with work. And yeah, it would never get very vulnerable. There was no, hey, I'm having this kind of a problem in my life, my personal life or whatever else that I just can't seem to figure out. Like none of that ever really. So very, I don't know, shallow is I think a harsh word. I think the reality is that they were pretty shallow relationships, but yeah. So
but
that's how I would kind of describe it.
There too, not because you're a shallow person or they're shallow people, but again, like when you follow the script, the Matrix script is, or maybe the Truman Show is a better one for that, because I think sometimes the world we're taught is a little bit like that too, where he comes out and greets his neighbors and, we have these kind of shallow relationships.
We didn't know any better, right? Like you don't know. Yeah. You thought it was your job not to put your crap on other people, right?
Right.
That was part of my existence, was to be less of an impact on, or to ask for or look for less from any of the other people. So it was weird, right? It was almost like you wanted to just put less on other people if possible. Right. And I think an emotional load or something like that was something that I think was real tough.
Yep. Yeah. I think that goes hand in hand with the idea that your value and worth come from productivity, because in a system where your productivity and performance establish your worth, the worst possible thing you could do is have a need. Anything that threatens your productivity, your utility. And that shows up when you get married, especially if you step into, usually quite vigorously and happily, the idea of being a provider, a protector, right? You become a father, you become a husband. And at first, it seems like a heyday. Oh boy, I get to do all these things that establish that I deserve to be here on this planet. So need, especially an emotional need, because you've also been told not to have an experience or relationship with your emotions. That's just, that's dead weight. You don't want that. It gets in the way of everything. But there's a part of us that still knows that's there. I would offer that that's the part of us that makes us want to go and drink or maybe do other things in other people's cases. Are you willing to talk a little bit about what role, if any, from your perspective, your relationship with your father has played into this? Like, how do you understand that for yourself?
Sure. Yeah. I think he came from a very Irish family. And the stories that I've been told about going back into the history there, it was a lot of emotional unavailability, right? There was no emotion present, right? The men were not emotional. They did the things that they needed to do. They did, and in the stories we'll hear, they did tend to get some level of satisfaction out of life, but a lot of it came from just like observing and seeing other people having fun or enjoying their lives or whatever else. Now, some of this is probably confirmation bias or just based on the way that I've seen things. From an emotional standpoint, that's not something that I got from my father. So it's anything like emotional support, of almost all of that came from my mother, if there was any, right? And she and I, we had some tough times when I was a teenager. I definitely gave her a hard time. I put her through the ringer emotionally. And it was just interesting because when it came to my dad, for whatever reason, he was an authority. I would not really talk back to him. I knew if I talked back to him, there'd be consequences and whatever else, and they would be real. But for my mother, I would definitely give her an earful, right? I'd follow her around the house, and it's pretty it was all verbal, right? There was no physical ever like that. But from a father standpoint, I think, yeah, I mean, he was kind of doing the same things, right? He worked hard. He was providing. We were able to upgrade our house when we needed to, and as I was growing up, everything worked out. He was there for everything. I don't think he ever, well, so it was interesting. He used to show up to my swim meets in a suit, right? So he would be working, and he would come right from work, and he would be in the pool area in a suit, like 3-piece. He was wear a vest, all of it. And it was probably 95 degrees in there. It's just like oppressive heat, right? But he would be there. So like, he was always there. But there wasn't like much of an emotional connection, I don't think, that I had. So from an education or learning about emotions or whatever, that wasn't there from him. But how to provide, how to be critical about, how someone's performing or not, how to find, if I ever had trouble with homework or whatever, he could instantly help me with that. Like, he was always there and ready to help with the practical things in life.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of men will resonate with this. I hear some flavor of this story from almost every man. Maybe one guy in 25 will say, man, I had an epic father, but the vast majority will describe a loyal, faithful father for the most part, but zero emotional layer to their relationship. So a lot of men in our age group, Jeff, seem to have this, it might be healed in some cases, but this kind of disappointment that we didn't know our fathers in a spiritually, emotionally intimate way. Like, we feel like we know them. Like, we didn't get to see their underbelly. We didn't get to see their hearts, is what I would say. And I think a lot of men have this kind of tender spot from that. We wanted more from our dads, and we didn't quite know what to do with that because we couldn't get that from mom. It wasn't the same.
Yeah.
You want to know your dad, I think, in a certain way as a young male, that for many men, they just never got that experience, and myself included. It took me a lot of years to process that. And then I was able to process it without my dad, interestingly, which I'm glad. I love my dad. He has dementia now, so there's no real chance for him to show me that part, but I'm glad I worked that out. But I hear this story a lot. And I think it has a lot to do with why we have struggled the way we have as men, because nobody showed us the internal landscape of manhood. They showed us how to be a protector, provider. Basically, they showed us the script that they were living by. And, it might have kept us alive. It might have put food on the table for people we care about, but it didn't feel inspiring. It's not something that most men would describe as being like deeply connecting and purposeful to live in, right? And so you try to come up with an identity. Yeah, I'm going to be a great husband, a great father. But then you're living in the future, thinking about retirement 30 years in advance instead of, wanting to be present. So, all right, thanks for sharing all that. I'm thinking this is going to be really meaningful to a lot of men listening. So back to the couch. You're sitting on the opposite side of the couch, and your wife is clearly not feeling so great about you. Maybe unpack a little bit of what happened next. Kind of, you start doing some Google searches, but what kind of things did you start to experience internally and relationally? Unpack your crisis for us a little bit.
Yeah. So the way I recall it, right, this searching and finding the information, right? So it was an interesting thing, the appetite I had to consume information at that point. So for a long time, I do have to pursue certifications and stuff like that for work. So I have kind of like a little bit of a discipline for that. But there was a period of time leading up to then where I just kind of had lost even that. So a lot of the passion in my life was gone. I had no real passions, just to kind of set the tone here. But then I started this research and just found online these articles, these links, these various groups. And I think really what it was to realize that I'm not alone, right? That this is something that's been happening and to other men, and that it was just so mind blowing, right? And then it was nice that I went out on that retreat because that was probably, a good, I said before, 2 months. I think it was a couple months, right? About 2 months, between my DIY, as it were, research and just consuming all of that information, and then going on that retreat. And then that kind of crystallized for me that there was this whole ecosphere. I say whole ecosphere. I think, even going back to 2018, what did you have? You had life coaches and things like that. So you had like a Tony Robbins or whatever else, like those types of people were there. But I don't know if it was even really a thing to have like a men's coach or a concept like that for men's issues. Maybe there was more of it out there than I knew of, but I didn't see a whole lot of it at that time. So after the retreat, I found out there was like a group coaching experience that I got into. And I did that for the entire summer after that ranch retreat. And that was a structured program. Went in, we read so much, and I'm still amazed at how much I was able to read and reflect and just to learn, and then start to make some changes in my life. Right. But all of which, it took me a while to come to the realization that my marriage was more or less irrecoverable. Like I don't like through that time, I was able to focus on the work, and things on the home front were good. I think we were making good improvements, and definitely there was an ease, because I think I was finally off doing this work by myself. I had a group of people that I could do that with, and that I think took a lot of pressure off of the home front. And I think that really sort of helped things. So that's kind of like the first 4 to 6 months ish were about that time, from the couch until then. And
what kind of patterns
from the group
were you
experience, when that finished, I knew that there was this Mexico retreat, and that was like coming up. I think it was May or April or May, the time frame. I guess we're getting into 2018, and that's kind of when I think at that point that's when we started moving towards divorce. So in that time, I should say we did some some counseling. It was very interesting because we had two therapists, and the first one, I don't think she knew how to deal with us, because the two of us came in and we were the most like rational, practical people. And in fact, what we would almost always do is we would sit down and we would start talking about the logistics of how we're managing the childcare and whatever else. So through this time, we were separated, and we were doing the nesting concept, which, if people don't know what that is, it's basically we had an apartment where one of us would be, and then the other parent would be home with the kids. And then we just alternate who was in the apartment for those periods of time. And yeah, so for therapy, it was interesting that we never really got any work done, in my opinion. I think it was more just we talked logistics. And I just don't know. So the first therapist she just said at one point that she didn't want to do anymore with us. So she was like, and then at that point I thought, okay, well, I agree. We'll go and try someone different. And then we had the same experience where it's almost like they couldn't lead us through any sort of a program, or it was just interesting. I wasn't sure. Like, I don't think we were unwilling. I think it was, I don't know. It was interesting. I don't know if I can even make sense of why it didn't work, but it didn't, like, in my opinion.
I'll be curious if you're willing to read my latest book, Unchained Husband. It's not really written for men that are already divorced, but I'd be curious if you read it, what your perspective would be with what you went through. I'll leave that up to you if you want to do that.
I'm definitely going to read it. Yeah, I'll definitely read it. Yeah.
So could you tell us a little bit about, in this early exposure to men's work? So you found Steve's articles and you went on a retreat. What kind of things were you learning about yourself? Like, what were the patterns you were discovering that were just new to you? The highlights.
So the theme with them, well, there were these, let me think. So the theme of the retreat, and I think a lot of what we did, and there was kind of 3 points. It was almost like what our work were. Maybe there were 4. So there was a, who are you, right? So come up with a definition of who I am. And then to figure out where I came from. Like, what are the things, I guess, that kind of made me who I am today, and whatever else. And then where am I going? right? And I think the last thing that they always ask for, by they, Steve and his group, he wanted to hear back from people a few years later, just to kind of say, well, these are the things that happened in my life since I started, the last 2 years. Hopefully it was like these breakthroughs and whatever else. So that was really hard for me. It took me a long time, and I'm still kind of coming to terms with it, of getting comfortable with just making a definition of like who I am, right? Because it means that I have to there's a little bit of, if I say that I'm into this, then, or I want to be in that direction, then there's a trade-off, right? And it was hard for me to kind of decide that these are the things that I like. These are my preferences in life, right? It took me a long time to get through with that. For sure. Also, there's a lot of the fundamentals that are the same everywhere, like that I thought were really interesting. So you learn all the tools or learn about relationships, attachment styles, and the drama triangle and all those sorts of things. And then you start figuring out, how can I apply this to like every aspect of my life? And it was really just interesting for me to be an observer, but to kind of break through from understanding the tools and to be able to start like defining them, but then also to knowing that I need to transform myself and make some decisions about who I am. Mm-hmm. And then and what I want out of life. Like that was really hard for me. It took me a long time to really get comfortable with having the opinions that I needed to have to kind of have a clear definition in my head of who I am, right? Mm-hmm. And even now, I think I kind of struggle with that. I struggle with it still. So but it's an evolution type thing, right? So every day is a new adventure, I guess, as it were.
I think that's common also. I would put life into 3 stages, potentially. Not everybody goes through these. We all have this stage in which we're born and we start, and that's a stage where your identity and your program is handed to you. So think of it like the childhood season of your life. And then you have adolescence. Mm-hmm. And some people never go beyond that. And in adolescence, you're discovering your discomfort maybe with childhood, but you don't know how to be an adult yet. So you're not an adult, but you're not a child. And then you have, this third season, which would be maturity, which would be adulthood. And we definitely have this physically. It's born in the pattern of our biology. But I find that people have this internally as well. And if I were to kind of like describe what goes wrong for men, is that men get stuck in early adolescence and at an internal level, where it doesn't quite feel right to have the identity and the programming they were given as children, but they don't know what to do. Like they don't know how to discover their identity. They don't know, well, what programming does work. And this, I would say, is really, not that I would blame anybody, but for most of human history, the older men have ushered the younger men through that process. They've taken them from childhood to maturity through that middle space of adolescence. But we haven't done that in Western culture for probably 200 years. So men are basically stuck. They're stuck in somewhere in adolescence. Their emotional, internal, spiritual, whatever you want to call it, but their internal selves is stuck in adolescence. So they might be an angsty teenager. They might be the teenager who knows how to drive but can't afford his own car, right? Like there's somewhere in this space of, I don't know what to do. And this is why I think it's so vital that men create a way of being that ushers other men through this space. But we didn't get that. That's what I think we really wanted in our fathers. We wanted our fathers to walk us through that middle space. But sadly, this is my perspective anyway, nobody walked my dad and your dad through that space, and probably their dad. And it's been a long time since somebody has walked men through that space. So your experience is really common. I'm not entirely sure who I am, so I can't answer some questions about maybe what's valuable to me, because I'm still trying to figure that out, because I'm still trying to figure out what's me versus what is the matrix version of me. Yeah. And I think this is cool, though, if you step back and you don't judge any of it, it's a great opportunity for us to figure that out. And a Matrix is actually a really good way to talk about it, because you think about Neo in the first Matrix. I'm assuming you watched that, by the way. I mean,
oh, definitely, yes.
Okay. I don't want to make assumptions. I mean, I don't run into too many people that haven't. Well, you know how disorienting it was for him when he meets Morpheus and he's learning about the real world, and then the Matrix, and there's a real identity confusion in there for a bit, because there's what's real and possible, and there's what he's already known, and those two things collide. And so there's this, the middle season, or this liminal season, where he doesn't know who he is. And that's interestingly in the story where he keeps going to the Oracle. He's trying to find out. And kind of, if you go back and watch that movie, kind of the message of the Oracle is, I can't tell you who you are. You have to tell you who you are. So that's very appropriate for our journey as men. And we have this middle season. So I appreciate you just being honest, explaining, yeah, this is complex, and it's not something you snap your finger and you decide. The crisis, interestingly, for a lot of us, is just the kickoff to making us look at it. It's a hero's journey. And even in the Matrix, the crisis is, I think I would put it as when he's in the office building and he gets the FedEx phone shipped to him, right? Where, because he kind of gets the invitation to the call, the whole follow the white rabbit, and he decides, like, yeah, I'm not interested. And in all heroes' journeys, there's a place where you have to go. And his is when he gets arrested by Agent Smith, right, and interrogated. And for you and I, and men today, a whopping amount of men, that crisis will come in their marriage, where they're like, okay, yeah. So, yeah, tell us more. What, was there a specific moment? What was your FedExed phone from Morpheus moment? Where you had to go on this transformational experience that you're on today of figuring out who you are?
That's my FedEx moment. I think I kind of feel like it was the article that I found, right? That kind of, once I found out that, like, what I'm going through is not unique. I think that kind of put me on a path of having to find out more. So I think that that's my moment. But it was a long time when that happened. I'm trying to remember the timing of this, because the other big epiphany for myself was when I figured out that I could actually decide to be okay. Like, I could convince myself that I am going to be okay. I am okay now, and there are going to be more challenges in my life. And I'm still dealing with challenges right now that are super uncomfortable and real hard, but I'm okay. And I just remember thinking in my head, I was like, for all this time I felt for years, right? Going back to who knows how, like maybe 13, 14 years old, that I had felt like I was locked in this cage. And there was that feeling that I would get in the pit of my stomach when I decided not to do something, or I decided to behave in a way that I knew was going to disappoint someone, right? Like my parents, my ex-wife, myself. So it could be something that's like intentional that I did, or something that just mistakenly that I did. It was that same feeling, like physically in the center of, and I'm pointing like right to my sternum right now, but that's kind of where I would feel that. And now I know when that happens, I feel like I'm okay. I've realized that I'm okay, and that's just a passing feeling. So you were.
Yeah. Are those moments where person you're considering being is really aligned with who you are, but it's going to disappoint somebody? Because I think that's the crux. Like, that is the hard part about this middle stage of our growth, is what we're really learning, Jeff, is not just who we are, but to be unapologetically who we are. And it takes courage, because we have to let go of the definitions sometimes that people gave us to live in, which we've outgrown. And it's not a rejection of those identities as being bad, but just done, right? You're the starter pack you're given to start life it serves a purpose, but it's not intended to live forever, in my opinion. But it takes a lot of gumption and grit, kind of overcome that feeling like I'm going to disappoint a bunch of people by being myself right now. And I think that's why so many people don't, is because you have to overcome the fear of, making a wife angry or making parents angry or disappointing somebody in your life.
So I might dig into that a little, because I think there's like a fidelity there, right? So some of it is, I might decide that this isn't working for me because this isn't who I want to be, right? And I know that that's going to could have a strong impact that I'm imagining, right? Because I have no idea what the impact's going to be until I put that like presence out there till people experience me in that fashion. Mm-hmm. That's one angle of it. I think the other is when I do operate outside of my ethics, right? So, or make a mistake. So whatever, forgot to do X, Y, or Z. I promised I was going to, or I agreed that I was going to take care of something, and then I forgot, let's say as a concrete example. It's the same feeling. I get the same feeling in my core between those two things, or it was the same feeling. But now I know that I can kind of separate that whole numbing concept where you just sort of like, you make a mistake, you feel a certain way, but when you operate outside of your ethics, you feel that same way. But are you aware of the fact that you're within or without your ethics or your code, right?
Yeah. I think of emotions like the engine light of a car. It's not there to give me the answer. It's there to give me the question. So even that feeling that you're kind of talking about in your solar plexus, my own perspective is that feeling is there to draw you into consciously being aware that you need to look at this. Yeah. But the feeling itself is not telling you it's right, it's wrong. It's there to wake you up. Yeah. And that's where your internal compass, you need to have a conversation with yourself saying, what is true? Who do I like to be? What do I value? And if you didn't have that moment where you felt something in your solar plexus, you would just blow on through it, right? And that's what numbing does, is when you teach men to be numb, it's kind of like telling a man to take his car and just clip the wires on all of his dashboard lights. Yeah. Turn your check engine light off, turn your oil gauge light off, your thermostat. If you did that, you might manage to drive a little bit, but it's not going to be very effective, right?
Yeah.
And then you have other people who treat their emotions as though their emotions are telling them the answer. I haven't found that to be a very effective way to be. I'm not going to criticize somebody who likes to be that way. But the reason I don't find it to be effective is because what you just said, I feel the same feeling in my body when I'm stepping out of my values, where like I'm in an ethical gray area, but I also feel that way when I'm feeling the tension of needing to be honest with myself and true and authentic. And it feels the same way in my body. So that's, to me, that points to the point being to get our attention, or I find it an effective way to use it. So, okay, this is helpful. So you start Googling like a madman. You go on retreats. You joined this group for the summer. Was that the cave? Was that what it was called?
Yeah, it was the men's cave.
The men's cave, yeah.
I think it's the men's cave, yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I think that was the first kind of group experience Steve Horstman did, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I did the second iteration of that.
Okay. Yeah. All right. And then I met you at the Mexico thing, and then I think a little while later we started mentoring men, and you joined there. And I was trying to remember which renewed masculine man you jumped into. Was that the first one?
Might have been the first one.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think it was one of my earliest iterations. Okay. So yeah, you've consumed a lot of information over the years. It's changed quite a bit over the years. But what did you discover about yourself? I mean, you mentioned that, hey, I'm still discovering myself. And I love that you said that, because this is never done. We're always in a process of remembering who we are. But have you come to any really concrete conclusions or discoveries about yourself in this process that all this path has helped you define?
I think one thing that's important to me is to be able to give myself some grace right? I know that I'm not perfect. I don't know how far I get through this journey, right? I'm going to keep walking it. So maybe that's the thing that I think is a key for me is to know that I'm always going to be working on this, right? And there's not a rush. I think that's something that I have struggled with. So over the last, because gosh, it's been 6 years, right? 7 years. And I've definitely burnt myself out. And I went through a few cycles of that. And not in, I mean, it wasn't good for me, obviously, but it wasn't like a catastrophic burnout or whatever, but it was just kind of like I need to take a break. I stopped reading. I almost completely lost my appetite for sort of the whole thing. Not that I don't think I really regressed or anything like that. I think more it was just that I knew I needed to, like I took a break and it probably that's something that I need to do better is to be able to measure it more and just kind of keep a more consistent pace. But again, yeah, like the important thing is to give myself some grace and understand that like this is a forever sort of thing and that it's like an incredible gift, right? To know that this is an option and to be working on these sorts of things. Is that
yeah, I mean, that's really
you were thinking?
I didn't really have a specific direction other than just what
Sure.
you've learned about yourself. What I think I hear you saying is that you've allowed yourself to just experience it all quite organically. I would say it's my perspective that it's healthy to take these kind of breaks that you're talking about. I like to look at the seasons as a great example. I think human growth is such, we try to live as though it should be spring all the time from a personal growth perspective. And that's one of the things that bugs me in a lot of personal development circles is that it can become a little bit of a taskmaster that becomes a new way to measure yourself and shame yourself. So you start to feel bad if you're not feeling good, or you start to feel bad if you're not perpetually in some sort of growth. But if you look at the natural world, there's a natural seasonality to living things. They have dormancy. They have, they have a winter and fall. They have a spring and summer. They have seasons of green growth and seasons of hardening. And I think that's a much wiser, more mature way to be as a human, where you allow yourself the seasonality of saying, you know what, I've been in like fire hose mode for a couple years when I was trying to figure some stuff out, when my crisis started. And I think it's imperative that you give yourself a break, whatever that looks like. That's a nuanced conversation to have in the realm of community, because it's really easy for men to drift into isolation. But there too, even as people who value community, sometimes you take a solo sojourn. That's just, that's what a pilgrimage, for example. I try not to be prescriptive about it, meaning like there's a way to do it that's right versus wrong. I think we all have to just be ourselves. And sometimes being ourselves says, you know what, I'm just tired right now. I don't want to be around people for a while. And trust yourself, but also trust people who know you, that you'll find your way back to what the next thing should be. Right. Yeah. So like for me, I have a value. If somebody comes to mind, I reach out to them, and it's not to try to sign them up to something. It's just my way. Oh, they're on my mind. I'm going to tell them. Yeah. And I do that with friends. And I think sometimes that creates this ebb and flow. Like, hey, maybe that person was walking alone for a while. And then maybe because one of us reaches out, they're not now. But you also have to give people the freedom to have their experience, to have their journey.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I get it. There's another angle to this too, that kind of like your and my experience and the timing of things in our development. So I think it was a little bit of a challenge for me was a number of the guys who I went through this process. So there are guys I was in Mexico and in Colorado with, who were trying to remember who all the people were in the men's cave. It was a lot of these guys came into the community new. They were not coaches, but they all got to a point where they decided, well, not they all, a number of them got to a point where they decided that they wanted to become that. And so I did have a hard time at one point, because I did have relationships with these guys, right? They were friends, and we were calling, and with a few of them, it turned into a situation where all of a sudden they were trying to make me a client. And
I see. Yeah.
That was really kind of that was in a way sort of tough for me, because I was like, wait a second, like in a way we've gone through this together, and I get it. Like you're trying to not, and this is not you directly, it's more just, there's a handful of people who went through, coaching programs and stuff like that. And it changed the dynamic. And it was kind of interesting, because I was like, well, I'm still feeling like in a way we're kind of peers, and that we're on this journey together, and that maybe I thought we had, kind of a personal relationship, but then it sort of turned into this thing where they then were like saying, well, I'd like you to start paying for this. And I was like, wait a second, like, or they just disappeared, right? They stopped being willing to, they just didn't really reciprocate the communication. So that was one of the first reasons why I kind of backed away for a period of time, was just because I was coming to terms with that, because I thought in my mind, I was like, yeah, maybe I want to pursue this coaching thing, but I never got to that point. And I think with you personally, it's a totally different experience, but that is one of the first things that kind of, in my journey, kind of impacted me.
I'm chuffed to bits that you even brought this up. I think I'm using that expression correctly. My daughters and Zelda like to watch these English shows, and they say these funny expressions. This is cool, because it's a weird thing too for, I think, men that go through that. And I remember, because I started out with a lot of guys too that I was just talking to all of the time, and some of them was quite time consuming. And it was weird to to become a coach and full time and figure out, what do I want to do with that? I've tried to, for my part anyway, with people that I've known for a long time. Because I've even had, I won't mention his name, but like some of my best friends in our community. And I've just said to myself, like, hey, I've been your friend for years, and I'm always going to be that. Right. Yeah. So I don't see myself as his mentor, for example. Or do I see him as a client? He's a community member. And so, he or has been, and, his contribution there is the community. My goal as a man is that we create a culture where we don't need professional coaches. Because I think actually an ideal world, maybe this is idealistic, is that we all know this idea of the empowerment dynamic. We know how to step into a moment with one another as, put our coaching hat on or our challenger hat on, and to help each other through those times. I think, yes, certainly there could be people like myself who we do that so much that that's how I happen to make my living, right? Yeah. But yeah, it's been a weird space to navigate with others. So I've tried to maintain more of a status quo, like, hey, what is my relationship like with this person? Like, how did it start?
Yeah.
And then how I just carry that forward, But it's different if somebody asks me for, to do my professional work all the time. To me, that's different than they just want to like check in. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah,
for example, if you're an attorney, and I'm using that because that's a common one, and we talk every month or whatever. And I mentioned something that you have a perspective on. I think that's the way friends are generally, is like, you might offer me your professional perspective, but it's not a client engagement, and I would do the same. I do the same all the time with friends, right? Yeah. Here's my perspective from what I do with my day-to-day work. You don't seem to be asking me like, hey, can we spend 20 hours together, working on a problem? So yeah, it's a little nuanced to figure out, isn't it? Sometimes with that kind of stuff. But I don't see that as different than any vocation. Anybody who has a vocation, I think you have to figure out with your friends, like what your boundary is between what are you just sharing as a friend versus what is free work.
Yeah. Like, can you help me fix my computer kind of thing?
Right? Yeah, right.
Yeah,
right.
It's the same kind of,
Yeah. But I appreciate you sharing also just vulnerably that's a hard space to navigate if all these people you started that with kind of become coaches, and then it sounds like you felt a little bit abandoned relationally in different ways, or just like it was too awkward to navigate that space.
Yeah, it was strange, right? Because I pursued and tried to keep things going, right? But then it just, I realized, their focus was in a different place, and it was okay. It was just kind of strange because these were people who I was like very, very connected to in the
Yeah.
very beginning
Yeah.
of all of this.
This is one reason too. For me personally, I like to practice my craft inside of a community, but I see myself as just a member of that community, right?
Right.
I think community, like I have to have community no matter what I'm doing. And what I like about the community context is, to me, like that's the place we all rub shoulders and we're all peers, etc. So it keeps that friendship and connection and togetherness going all the time.
Yeah.
And so I have built Masterful Men with this concept of it's a us community, a we. If for some reason you need something from me, well, not just you, but anybody. Yeah, you can certainly pursue that. But my goal is that the we take care of the bulk of what people need from one another. So that it kind of works to alleviate some of that weirdness. That's why there's two levels, right? There's just a membership, and stuff is led by other people in the community. It's not uniquely me. That feels the most aligned for me. That's who I like to be the most, anyway. So, well, I was going to ask you, like, how your relationship with other men has changed over time, and you've told us a little bit about that. So that sounds complex. What other ways have your relationships with men changed in these 6 or 7 years?
So I feel like in a way I'm kind of struggling there to a certain degree. So I've started to hold, well, I think my presence is different a lot of, and I have to be measured because the whole crisis thing, right? Like people have to be in a certain position to hear this sort of messaging, right? So it's kind of an interesting thing where I tell them, and I'm very, very honest with my friends and anyone who's interested in hearing the story, right? So, they know that I went on these retreats. They know that I'm a part of these groups. I've definitely forwarded articles to people and shared that with them. But the way I see a lot of this, and I'm by no means an expert, but there's a phrase that I've heard in the past. It's like, on their own time, right? Like people need to decide if they're going to start moving in this sort of a journey on their own time, right? You can't force someone, but you can still maintain a positive relationship with those people and be, just explain boundaries and things like that. So I think from that perspective, I think a lot of my friends kind of see me a little bit differently than they did before. Like they know that where I stand about things and what I'm supportive of or what I can't support, certain behaviors, just commentary or whatever else, that I'll speak my mind about some of the older adages, right? Like even that I kind of partook in before. I definitely have, I think, a better relationship with coworkers and things like that. I've become a much better manager, I think. I've been much better at understanding where people were coming from kind of emotionally. So just learning and understanding people more holistically than it was just, hey, I need you to do this. You're not doing that. I don't care what else is going on with you, right? I need you to deliver at this level, and it's on you to figure it out. I've been able to, I think, kind of improve my ability to kind of work with people and motivate people that way. And I think it's really been helpful for me and everyone around me.
Do you think you have more empathy and compassion and just understanding in general?
Yeah. Like I can listen to someone tell me about, if their emotional story and not get uncomfortable and not make it personal anymore. Right. Mm-hmm. I think maybe that's the biggest thing that I've learned here is that anytime anyone is emotionally charged or seems like they're in a really tough situation, like I now am, I think, very capable of being able to hear what they say and not take it personally. Like I always would it was always about me, right? Like if someone's coming at me and they're emotionally charged, it's because of me, right? I have something to do with this, and I'm some way responsible for resolving it. And I think that that's something, I mean, that's been a huge thing for me with my sons and daughters, or with sons and daughters, my kids. I mean, I have a son and a daughter. Same thing with the men, same thing with coworkers, friends, and even, the women that I work with as well. Same kind of thing.
How about your ex?
Sorry, repeat that one.
How about with your ex-wife?
With her, I think we have a special kind of relationship. I think there's definitely their shields are up. We definitely, I think, are very aligned with raising the kids. So it's a co-parenting thing. I feel like are currently in a situation where it's sort of like it's a business-ish kind of relationship. So it's logistics, it's all that stuff. And we're able to work together. There's not a lot of conflict. We've been able to hold each other accountable for when we thought things were not going the way that they should be going, which is, I think, kind of good. Maybe that's an improvement that we're able to be a little bit honest with each other. But for sure, it's not like it's a different kind of relationship in my mind. It's almost like a coworker kind of relationship. I guess a coworker who you've known for 25 years and in a lot of different ways, right? Yeah. But
it doesn't sound hostile. It doesn't sound like you feel victim-y about it at all.
No, I mean, I don't know. I guess like thinking about it, and this is like, she gave me, it's a gift, right? So to have someone who's willing to kind of hold the mirror up for you, as we say, that's a phrase that we commonly use, right? Like that women have a way of being able to reflect, and it's like almost like they don't even know that they're doing it, but they can do it, and they do it, and it's a gift, right? It's just unfortunate that it had to be given in the way that it was given, right? It was like we were both in pain, and she still did it, which is like amazing, right? Like we're not still suffering in kind of, because I would, I'd still be here living the same way I was 7-8 years ago if she hadn't pushed that way. But it's just really unfortunate that, I don't know, I guess, I don't know if there's a good way to put it into words, but like that's a gift that a woman, I wish she didn't have to give it the way that she gave it, if that makes sense. I wish it could have been like a...
Yeah. Sometimes I think it might even be fair to say, I wish I could have received it in another context than how I had to receive it. Yeah.
Yeah. Like maybe the first time she gave it to me instead of like 30 million times.
And a lot of women
get the 30 millionth time. Yep.
A lot of women are very angered by that because, well, naturally they're frustrated, but I'll go back to the thing that you said a moment ago about men in their own time. And what I think we would all benefit to realize, men and women alike, is we can't be ready to receive something before we're ready to receive something. And when somebody doesn't receive what is easy to see from your perspective that they very clearly need, you can't cajole them or pressure them into it. You can't shame them into it. We try all these tactics to get people to change their mind. But one of the most effective ways to help somebody is to let that go. Like, stop trying to get them to change their mind and just start living as your authentic self. This is actually one of the hardest parts about coaching, because like any helping people through hard times, you can see the world differently than they do. And they're coming to you maybe because the way you're seeing the world is really producing good things in your life. But then you tell them, here's what I do. And they're like, no, that can't be it. Right. Because they're not prepared to hear it yet. But I also talk to a lot of women who are really frustrated that the men in their life aren't understanding what those women are saying. And they're taking it very personally because they haven't done the work required for themselves to not take it personally. Right.
Yeah.
And so, but I'm just saying that because it's kind of peripheral to what we're talking about. It's very difficult in marriage. It's a common theme that comes up where you see what your partner doesn't see yet. and this happens both ways. Like you saw stuff that your ex-wife really needs to see, and she saw stuff that you really needed to see. But neither of you can see it till you're ready to see it. And interestingly, the best context to see yourself is in a place of acceptance. But oftentimes we haven't done the growth yet to do that. So we're trying to judge each other and shame each other and yell at each other into seeing our point. I call this perspective dominance. And interestingly, that's what ends up contributing towards the destruction of the relationship, because we become entrenched and insistent that they see things our way instead of looking at ourselves. It's very hard. But yeah, it's a shame, isn't it, when you can't see something until you see it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, but again, like you have to give yourself grace, right? I'm glad that I do see it. But now, right? And there's a lot that I'm not seeing now that hopefully I'll be seeing tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's not unwillingness, right?
No, it's not.
Yeah.
I don't know. I keep falling back on the blind spots comment. I just, you just, and that's curiosity, right? Like if you have curiosity, then you have a fighting chance, I think, of kind of like working into those and understanding them. And so 7-8 years ago, well, from my 20s leading up to that point, I had really kind of, I think, fought away the curiosity, right? It was more stop being curious, just do.
I think you need to have a certain amount of freedom to be curious. And it goes back to the idea of pressuring. If you feel pressured to get the answer or to see, you stay in your blind spots, because I don't think an anxious place is a great place to discover your blind spots. I think you discover them when you feel most at ease and free. Zelda and I really we've been like lifelong Amazing Race fans.
Yes.
You ever watch that?
I remember that. You've told me that before. Yeah, I did. I watched a few several seasons of it.
It seems like there's always a moment in each season where, as the observer watching, somebody's caught in a blind spot, and it's like this obvious thing right in front of their face, but they're getting so worked up that they don't see it, and they're making some catastrophic mistakes. And it's hard to watch, knowing like, hey, they may have just forfeited their race. They may have just had a race altering moment because of that blind spot. But it's not like we, the viewer, can tell them. Or even on that race, the partner is not allowed to speak. And it's interesting to watch how their partner knows that they're blind. But this is what happens in marriage. And if I could relive my own marriage, it would be in any moment I did that, just to step back, breathe deep, and agree to love the person more deeply in their moment of blindness instead of getting worked up about it. I think that would make a huge difference. That's what I would do now. But I was blind to that. I didn't know to do that back then.
Right.
Yeah. Well, speaking of going back and, reliving things, what would you tell an older version of yourself if you could go back and have a conversation with Jeff from 7 or 8 years ago?
Yeah, that's always a hard one. I don't know. I think it's just, if I could have imparted in myself an awareness that I did have the agency to make a decision about how I wanted to be, right? And I could have decided I'm happy being a B+ student. I'm, wanna work hard on the sports that I was a part of, and I'm also okay with understanding that, there's always going to be the people who are, head and shoulders above you, but you can still love doing the thing that you're doing, right? That it gets you out of bed in the morning, and just being able to appreciate that like, hey, you know what, even though I wasn't able to win, or I never really achieved the things that I had hoped to do, like I got out of bed every morning and enjoyed all of that time, and that's important, right? To reflect on that. So I guess that gets you into the whole living in the moment, like understanding what's kind of driving you, and being able to let some things go, right? If it's not working for you, then to make a change, try something different or whatever else, to not get hung up on the risks. I think that's the other thing. Maybe the final thing I would want is I think in my life, I've always been focused on the risks. So, let's not do something because I can come up with the 90 reasons why there might be a problem. So maybe that's kind of like the final thing, is to just know that even if things don't work out or I don't have success, that's a learning experience, and that's something that you can build off of. I guess maybe one more thing is just that you're okay. You're going to be okay. But you have to really believe that in your mind, and convince yourself that that's like the truth, that you have the tools and you have all of the things that you need to get yourself to that point where you are okay. You're going to be okay. You're going to make it through whatever the challenges are that you're facing now, and whatever you'll face in the future.
It sounds a little bit like the younger version of yourself was maybe a bit hypervigilant with the risk aversion and a fear of not being okay and whatnot.
Yeah.
Would you have described yourself that way?
Yeah. You know what? I thinking now, and I don't know if this is really the truth or not, the reality of it, but it was anxiety. I've been challenged with anxiety my whole life. Like, I still struggle with it. And I think that wasn't so helpful, in positioning me in a way that I could kind of come to the kind of realizations that I needed to, that like, how do you become an emotional adult, right? Like I was stuck. So who knows, right, wrong, or indifferent. I think it was, the challenges I've had with anxiety and not recognizing it for what it was, right? Not a rational thing or whatever. It was just, something inside of me, was anxious, and that caused me to shy away, I think, from going down swinging, I guess, as opposed to going down looking, right? So.
Yeah, I think that is the nature of anxiety. I grew up with problems with anxiety too. And I would say they do create that hypervigilance on some level. And it can be really confusing because you're experiencing your body's sort of physiological fingerprints of what your body thinks is going to happen. Yeah. And it's not that it's correct. It's just your body walks around thinking like, is this danger? Is this going to be danger? And those are patterns we learn as young people. And my personal experience has been, you can resolve a lot of that with men's work, sure. But a lot of that is physiological and requires some different layers of care. For example, I have some anxiety just related to like hospital environments because of some things that happened when I was a kid. So if I go to the doctor and I just sit down and I see a blood pressure cuff, my blood pressure spikes, right? It's not mental. It's like my body remembers this context of where being in the hospital all the time was a scary thing. So this kind of thing. I say all that to just explain that this stuff is complex to work through.
Yeah.
Right. And we don't need to do it all at once. I think the point is being in an environment where we can understand ourselves and grow. And maybe that also entails still working out your anxiety. Right. So you've said that, hey, yeah, I still struggle with anxiety today. First of all, again, thank you for being open and honest with us about that. What does life feel like now in ways that are new compared to the past? Like, what are things that you feel differently about? Maybe about your sense of your understanding of masculinity, your sense who you are as a man, your leadership, really anything. I'd like to know how life is different today than 6 or 7 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I'm able to get a lot more joy out of life. So I can appreciate a lot more of what's happening and unfolding right in front of me. I think that's, it was always hard for me to take a compliment or feedback or whatever else. I think I'm able to see and understand a lot more of what's going on around me. So outside of the joys of life or whatever else, but that I can also, I think, appreciate that other people around me are going through their own journey, right? And that what is happening with them, it is it's most likely has nothing to do with me in a way, which is something that I just was not able to do even 8 years ago, that I could separate myself from what other people's experiences were. So I think as a parent, that's been huge. And also too, right, with meeting women and dating and things like that, just I do get a lot of feedback from them that it's like an interesting experience with me, right? And actually have made a plan for a date, to have opinions about things, right? Like even from the standpoint of just saying that I don't want onions on that. Like we were working on, this is a concrete example where I just said, hey, we were trying to pick a pizza out. I was on a date. We were trying to pick a pizza out together, and I had narrowed it down to a couple and whatever else. It was just like, this one, if we do that, then I'm cool with that, but we just can't get the onions on it or whatever. And it was just funny, like, because she at that point kind of stopped and was like, it's really nice to have someone tell me what they think on a date. And I was like, really? Just like about the toppings on a pizza? So I think, that's something as well, that I'm much more comfortable making a plan and making things happen. Leadership in a way, I guess, like I was saying at work, that's been huge for me. Just being comfortable with taking a leadership role and really just kind of driving a group to become better. Yeah. So I'm just kind of on a riff here, but I feel like those are the sorts of things that are different for me.
Is there anything that you experience regularly now that in the past you wouldn't even have thought it was possible? And that could be emotionally, relationally, spiritually, sexually, it could be anything.
I think that I can be alone.
Oh, that's a great one. That's a great one.
I mean, I have some twinges, but like even coming into this weekend, so my children are away on a trip, and they're gone for the whole week. And this weekend came up kind of quick. It was, busy at work, and I didn't have any plans or anything like that. And then Thursday night I rolled around and I was just like, holy smokes, I have a whole weekend with nothing to do. And I had the initial kind of like in the past, I just remembered I could not have tolerated like having that in my life. And really what it would have turned into is I would have probably sat on the couch and played video games and drank beer, right, all day. And because I needed to have something to keep my mind off of like being me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Maybe in a way it's like less specifically being alone, but I think, being alone is when you're kind of forced into the situation where it's like me and myself, right? And I can actually be with myself now and not want to crawl out of my own skin, which I would say through the 20s and the 30s and most of the start of my 40s, that was not the case.
Yeah, what I hear you saying is you're able to enjoy solitude, the pleasure of your own company. Yeah. To me, that is the huge prize. I think actually the grand prize of all of this work is to like yourself and be able to enjoy spending time with you. And I don't think that that's unrelated to how you relate to everybody else. I think the reason you can enjoy a date and say you want no onions on a pizza is because you have that kind of relationship with yourself. But I don't think our young selves can understand that.
Yeah. And some of these things are things that I'm doing unconsciously now that I don't think I would have done before. I would have just let the other person make the decision because I wanted to be, in my opinion, less of a burden, to have fewer demands. And when the reality is, I think so many other people, women maybe, but so many other people on the planet are looking to have someone else come with an opinion, to have a plan, to say, all right, this is how it's going down. And to be willing to step into that role. And then if someone does say to me, you know what, that's not really what I want to do or whatever else, then at that point we've identified there's a conflict, right? But we can work through that together. And that's something that we can do together in a controlled way, right? That works out for both of us.
Yeah, and it's honest and authentic. Even the pizza, if somebody really wants onions and you really don't, at least now you know. Nobody's hiding their truth. Yeah. Nobody's stomaching what they really want silently, which is an anti-pattern for intimacy and connection. Intimacy and connection is really born in a place where we can just be open and honest with each other about who we are, what we want, what we don't want, and still decide to accept one another. But you can't even begin to do that if you can't be honest about things like, I don't want onions on my pizza,
Right.
So, but when we're younger, less mature, we believe that safety is found in sameness, and safety is found by not rocking the boat. So we don't want conflict because we're afraid of conflict being disconnecting and separating. But the reality is intimacy is absolutely built on difference and your ability to meet each other in difference and to choose each other despite difference. And, when that clicks, whether it's with buddies or dates or children, just the world works better when you're free to be yourself. It sounds like you figured out how to do that.
Yeah. I mean, there's more to go, right? But
has the price been willing? Has the price been worth it, I should say?
I mean, sort of. Like if you were to say, like, would you put your marriage, or would you, like, what would you have traded any of these other things, right? And specifically, I think the answer is, I think no. It's just how the cards were played, right? The sequence of events or whatever that got me to be like where I am right now. Could I have learned all of these lessons like on my own time? Like, could my own time have come when I was 22 if something happened or whatever? Absolutely. But I don't know. It's weird. Like, I don't think I would trade anything right now. I don't think I would want to make anything in my past any different. Are there the things that I wish had gone better or whatever else? Yeah. But I'm happy where I am today.
Yeah.
And it's that past that, if I change it, then I'm not going to be here. It would be a different me. And maybe it would be a better me or a worse we or the same we. I don't know. Yeah. So is that.
I think that's great. To be able to live in such a way that you can look at your past and just say, I accept it. It's happened how it's needed to happen. And I don't know that I would change any of it. Yeah, certainly part of me wishes some elements would be different. But if I could change it, would I? No, not really. Because what it's produced in me is something I see or acknowledge as good right now. Yeah. I think that's a good way to live without really wallowing in regret or remorse or being stuck in the past. I think it's just healthy to be able to take a bird's eye view and to say, I just not have any judgment about it other than I accept how my life has gone and I'm creating something good out of it. I think that's the superpower. Personally, I talk to a lot of men, of course, who are in the middle of crisis, and I can say that the ones who are stuck in the past and wishing the present and the past were different are generally the most miserable.
Yes. Yeah. I think maybe my story was a lot about wanting to be 40 years in the future, right?
Yeah.
And I think the opposite end of that could be wanting to have changed my past.
Yeah.
It's the same, not the same. Well, I mean, maybe it's kind of the same sort of thing.
I think both of them are in some way a rejection of the present. I think they're the same thing at the end of the day. When you're fixated in the past or you're fixated in the future, it's because you're uncomfortable with right now.
Right, exactly.
And I think that ultimately comes back to, how do you feel about you? Because if you don't like you, you're gonna leave you,
be somewhere else.
And you're gonna project yourself into the future where you believe a future version of you is likable, or you're going to be stuck in a past where you believe that version of you was worthy or whatnot. That's just my own perspective. I think the greatest gift on planet Earth is to be able to live in a state of acceptance of who you are at this moment, and enjoy that. It's also the hardest thing to come to that. So if someone listening right now, by the time this gets published, of course, is resonating with your story, Jeff, what's one piece of encouragement that you would offer them right now? Just realizing they might be on the end of the couch with a partner on the other end, or maybe they just got told they've got to wait 2 months between talking to somebody in a retreat, anywhere in your story.
Well, I don't know. Maybe I'm doing it so anyone can do it, I guess is maybe the first thing. I think that there's not a rush, right? But there is an urgency to making sure that you're doing the things that you need to do to open your eyes, to try and understand what's happening. Like you need to figure out. Curiosity is so important here. And it's painful because it forces you to have to kind of come to terms with a lot of your demons, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like why are you running away from the present? But you can do it. It's painful. It's also so rewarding, right? Just to learn these things and to understand and like you do have more control over your life and how you respond to things than you might think you have right now. Right. Like you might feel like you're deep in it and there's no hope or whatever else, but you have more agency than you might think right now. So just stick with it and do what you can, right, to try and make progress, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I don't have a right answer. This is all about what you want to share. All right. So in the last minute or two here, a few minutes, I like to give sometimes some rapid fire questions that we just come up and they're fun. Don't overthink them. What's the last personal kind of thing that you have sought answers on the internet for?
Right. So I am dating right now, right? So I am spending a lot of time reading about that. And part of the research that I'm doing is just because I'm just starting with people. So it's remembering and just thinking about how do you control the initial stage, not control, but how do you work through the initial stages, like the first couple of dates with people, what are the reasonable, some approaches there, right? That can help with that and dealing with the emotionals, because it's very dysregulating. I've found that emotionally it's dysregulated me quite a bit.
Really?
And I'm able to maintain kind of a good composure through it all, but it definitely was one of those things where it kind of got me curious. So yeah, right now so between AI and I guess, dating, those are kind of
that's an interesting mix. Okay. The next question, what should have I asked you, but didn't? Here's how you know, when you're thinking about doing this before we ever got on this call today, were you like daydreaming or fantasizing about saying something really cool and profound and wise?
No, I think I was just kind of, I'm not going to answer your question, I don't think, but more it's like from a standpoint of, I was nervous because I'd given you a topic, I think, and I can't even remember what it was. It was something that I wanted to talk about. And then you just kind of pushed it back a little bit to like, hey, this is your story. We're talking about your story.
That's just me dropping the ball. I didn't realize you asked to talk about a topic. That's a Sven screw up, man. I apologize.
No, all good. All good. No, this was great. Like I was just, I don't know what you should have asked. You did it was great because you kept bringing it back to the couch. I feel like the couch moment is kind of, that is something that I can vividly remember. I remember that almost exactly what was said word for word and how things went down. So yeah. So I don't have a good answer.
That's that okay. One. How about this? And maybe this will work. An hour after we're done, what will you wish we had talked about? Where you'd be like, oh, I should have said such and such.
Well, I need an hour, right? to have that one. No, I think we didn't talk a whole lot. And I know this is probably intentional. We didn't talk a whole lot about the experience with the children, which I think is very delicate, right? That's something that we need to be real careful with. Because for obvious reasons. But I think that there's some interesting aspects to the experience there, the approach and those types of things. So there may be some things there that might have been interesting to talk through. Yeah.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because here's where I am with that in general. That is the number one anxiety men have who are potentially facing a divorce when I speak to them, pretty much. And it comes up a lot. I mean, I talk to a lot of men who are facing divorce. What I typically do, because for me it's about integrity and authenticity, is I will offer them as much encouragement as I can from what I've observed. But because my story didn't unfold this way, I have no firsthand experience of actually being in a place where I was seeing my kids half the time or nesting and whatnot. So what I typically do is I refer them into the community to talk to the many men in our community whose stories have unfolded with divorce process or completely getting divorced, or we've had a little bit of everything in our community. And I feel like the men who offer the most clear perspective are actually guys like you who've lived through 7 years or so of that and say, hey, here's what you can expect. Here's what the terrain was like. So I hope if a man listening has anxieties about the kids, that he will reach out and get to know you and get to know some of the other men who've reached out. Because I think we could have a whole panel conversation at some point about these concerns and anxieties with the kids. Probably the least qualified person in our community to talk about that.
Fair enough.
Just with my background. All right. Is there any question you'd like to ask me? And then we'll wrap it up. And if it's no, that's fine too.
Well, I think maybe with this podcast, like what are your goals? Like what are your dreams to see? Like where does this go for you? So what issue episode 14 is this?
Something like that. Yeah. I think we've built a really cool thing in Masterful Men as far as the depth of connection and authenticity, the quality in which men relate to each other. Meaning, based on how we've created it, it's really quite astounding as far as it's a place that you really can be yourself. You're not going to experience judgment and shame. It's not polarizing like a lot of the internet. It's not fractured. It's supportive. I'm just really proud of the community that we have created. And so my number one thing is to tell the stories of the men in that community, because I believe one of the most redemptive things about these experiences we've all had is telling their stories. Because for every Jeff in the world, or every Jeff like you who tells a story, there's 10 Jeffs out there who are thinking that they're the only ones in the world that feel like this. And I believe that our podcast will be a little bit like a lighthouse that just says like, hey, because when in my story, I went through like really 7 years of really, really difficult marriage stuff. And despite being a technologist at the time, I never Google searched anything related to it. I was looking for something real. What I couldn't find was something that felt trustable and real and authentic. And what I really needed was a place where I could feel like I wasn't crazy and like I wasn't the only one. So I believe that every time one of the guys in our community tells that story, there's just more men that are going to feel seen and supported. Like there are people out there who get it. And like there's a map to going through this, that people understand this journey and that people don't feel alone. So I'm interested in telling the member stories because, if I tell my story, I could tell it one time. I'm only going to reach people that my story resonates with. But every time I tell another person's story on this podcast, it's like the reach is infinitely more expansive.
Yep.
So that's my goal. I don't know that every man needs to reach out. A lot do. And that's certainly gratifying. It's really cool to be able to hear from a man who said something like, hey, I just heard Jeff's podcast. And that's me, man. It's like he's under my bed. And then to be able to say, oh, well, why don't you come join us and I'll introduce you to him before sundown. That's a really neat feeling. I like to tell this one story. Our very first episode we put out, which was Brian. Brian told his story just like you are. And a man was doing a search for something about self-worth, found that podcast, was listening to it. This is all the way in Abu Dhabi. And he felt like he was listening to his story. He stopped playing golf. He got a cup of coffee or tea or something, and then spent 2 hours on the side of the golf course just listening to the episode, just gobsmacked that he was hearing a story that was so relatable to him. He reached out to me, ended up joining. Those two now are connected and are friends. And he's getting support through this time in his life, right? From the guy who told his story. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm certainly involved too, but to me, like that's just awesome. That's just awesome. This guy in Abu Dhabi now is connected to this guy in Utah because they have this common story. And then he's listened to all these others. So now this man from Abu Dhabi has relationships with different ones of us. You may have talked to him too. And he's feeling seen and supported. He's growing. He's going through his own kind of transformation from, emotional childhood to adulthood as a man. And cool things are happening. And it wouldn't have happened if Brian hadn't told his story. So that's what I'm getting out of this. And I'm going to do it as much as we can. Interestingly, another side effect is a lot of women listen to this podcast too. And I think it's been a real lighthouse for them too, because you probably know there's a lot of not so great messages about women that men are promoting. And when a woman is in a spot where she's feeling like maybe your ex did, and they hear our podcast and they hear about a community where men are encouraging one another to have ownership and agency and self-leadership, and they're generally pretty excited too. So I've heard from people where that's caused people to turn a corner in their relationship and things. So yeah, I'm just doing it to see if it helps, and I think it does.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I think getting the stories told, right, is so important. And right, I mean, anyone who can benefit from this, I agree with you. So my small part, I guess.
It's not as small as you probably realize. I know that your story will resonate with people. It's going to encourage people who are on the same trajectory. It's going to encourage people who can relate to even what you shared about like your swimming career and being okay placing fifth, but not feeling like it was okay in the eyes of those around you to be anything other than, the first. I know that's going to touch people. And so you may see them in a week or two. But you get a chat message from me and Masterful Men saying, Jeff, meet such and such who heard your podcast and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, it happens all the time.
Yeah, I'd love that.
Pretty cool.
I'd love that.
Well, thanks again for your willingness to share and to tell your story. And if you can think about what the topic was you wanted to talk about, I'd love to have you back for that conversation. And please forgive me for dropping the ball on that.
No, that was okay. This was important. I think this is a good one to start it. So
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I've got a lot more episodes to do. We will. All right. Good being with you.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Masterful Man podcast. If today's conversation resonated with you and you're ready to break free from stuckness, build unshakable confidence, and lead your life with unstoppable purpose, I invite you to take the next step. Join a community of men who are committed to growth, challenge, and real transformation. Learn more at www.masterful.men, because the life you want starts with the man you choose to become.